Okay, as we move along here, we still have one or two people within your homework group to get a mission, and we'll get there here very quickly. So potential and actualization, body and soul. Aristotle describes three types of soul. And notice that this has kind of an evolutionary flavor to it, although they weren't, I don't think, talking in strict terms of evolution. But plants, right, have a nutritive soul, and this is about as far as it gets. Plants have some abilities to, well, I think one of the most amazing abilities that I see in plants is the ability to orient themselves towards sunlight. So for photosynthesis, right, sunlight is the bomb. It's going to create the sugars in which the plant exists, and the plant actually can physically orient itself to maximize the amount of light it absorbs, thus maximizing its photosynthetic process. That's pretty cool, right? Is the plant got a soul? Well, that's a discussion over maybe a couple glasses of wine, but we can see how that metaphor might work. Now, the sensitive soul is found in lower animals, and I use that in quotes because some people believe that animals are in a hierarchy, others just believe that animals are animals, including humans. The sensitive soul is found in lower animals, and they have sensory apparatus. Don't you? Huh? So you like that? And I woke you up, and I'm sorry. We should leave sleeping cats lie, right? But they have this sensitive soul. The human contains the above two, so we have those, and then we are bestowed a third, and this is scientific thought or deliberation. And you can see how this might work when we talk Aristotle, but it also maps onto Plato. Think about it. The plant has a drive to gain as much light as it can for photosynthesis, and that might be the desire. The heart, the area of the soul, right, that we see animals behave courageously, and sometimes a dog might seek to put itself in between us and a threat to defend us, right? And we look at that dog as having courage and heart, right? And then the brain, the top where the reason is located, is thought to be pretty much human. Although we see with a lot of marine mammals, more sophisticated animals like elephants, that they probably have a lot going up in the head as well. So the sensitive is linked to desire. Is it possible to sense what is pleasant and what is painful, right? And that's an argument. Do plants feel pain? Some people maintain yes, others maintain no, but we know obviously that animals have the capacity to feel pain, and that would be part of the sensitive soul. So now, the nutritive, right, is active and passive components of the soul, and I'm not going to torture you with this. I'm just including it because it takes it a step further. The nutritive is considered active, digestion, reproduction. The sensitive is considered passive, and the sensations are the result of being acted upon, right? So passive stimuli, and often we come to class with kind of this passive soul in place, that we just want the knowledge to wash over us, right, and just experience it. So passions are passive, right? They arise from the cognitive process of judgment. They thought to be a production of habituation quite often, that responses become habituated. Perceptions are passive. Some might argue that they're learned, but for the most part, brightness, it's not something that I'm actively engaging in. It is either bright or not, and I simply sense it. Imagination is passive, and that's in response to outside stimuli. Right? Human is differentiated by the power of thought. It's active but cannot initiate action. It requires rational appetites or the desire to think about it. And boy, think about thinking, metacognition, and there's a lab here at Ohio State in the Social Psychology Department, Rich Petty's lab, that developed a measure called need for cognition, and it taps into this thing directly. That is, to what extent does someone like to think, and it appears to be an individual difference. So, is Aristotle complicated or what? So we know emotion can be active or passive, voluntary or involuntary, cognitively generated, or it can be an affective sensation. I'm not, like I said, this slide, the previous slide, don't labor over them, but and when all else fails, we can get a dummies book, so there's ancient Greeks for dummies. But notice that we're not really getting a unified theory of emotion from Aristotle, and that can be problematic. So Aristotle does suggest how to use emotion necessary for a speaker to understand the beliefs of the audience. So when we go to make a speech, when we go know your audience to be most effective, and if you're going to use an emotional appeal, you especially need to know your audience, right? To stir the appropriate emotions to make happen what you want to make happen. And this is a huge point. And this will be explored empirically to the nth degree by people in marketing and other related fields, right? And again, the Attitudes Laboratory at Ohio State in the Social Psychology Department is huge on this, right? So how to create the audience emotions that support the message being delivered becomes very, very important in this context, at the core of advertising. And we're going to look at an advertisement in a later lecture and allow you guys to look at the components of how this is done. Emotions can be cultivated by focusing parts of the soul, the nutritive, sensitive, the human, thinking and reason. We have different areas that we can speak to, and if we align those areas, we might even have a more effective advertising appeal. Moderation in virtues and vices becomes key to cultivation of appropriate. So we have virtues, right? And if we have too much virtue, we might be considered sanctimonious. But if we have no virtue, right, and succumb to our vices, then we're almost, in essence, criminal. So here is one place where Aristotle becomes a little more transparent to our thinking. And look, the sphere of action or feeling. Fear and confidence. What if someone has too much fear or confidence in a given situation? They might appear rash. If they lack, right, any confidence at all, then they're probably going to appear as a coward. But the golden mean is that sweet spot, that central spot that Aristotle is offering that we should try to achieve is the golden mean, and that is to display courage. So not to be rash, but not to be a coward, but to be courageous. By the way, we have a couple short lecturettes, emotion and focus. Well, actually, they're not that short, but coming up at the end of the course, and one of those is on courage. That was written last semester when we all got kicked out of school at spring break. That was a real hardship. Now, go on down the list. Pleasure and pain. Licentiousness, that is giving into pleasure, right? Almost in an immoral sense, has kind of got that flavor to it. Temperance is moderation in all things. Oh yeah, we might have heard that. And deficiency is insensibility, that is these outside forces having no impact at all. All right. So getting and spending, major. Vulgarity, we see some people over-decorate their houses, might have gold-plated toilets, and you go, that's really a bit much. That's kind of vulgar. Notice it's gone beyond. The golden mean is magnanimity, and that is to give freely of oneself, right? And the deficiency might be pettiness, or refusal to give, or to hold people to account for the most minor of violations. And then we can go on down the list, like anger, right? Irascibility, anger all the time. Patience is I don't become angry. Lack of spirit means I'm not going to get angry because I don't give a care whatsoever. So you can see that, let's go on down to shame. And we see shyness, right, would be an excess shame. Modesty would be thought to be appropriate in Aristotle's world, represent that sweet spot in the center, that golden mean, right? And shamelessness is having no shame whatsoever, right? And notice that would be a feature, let's say, of psychopathy, if you will. So this leads us then to the fifth opportunity in homework 1. And about that golden mean, so one of you can then pick virtues and vices applied to the person's situation. What are the 3 levels of your chosen emotion from the table in the lecture, and what can be done to achieve the golden mean in your example? All right. So you might take one from the table, right? Or you might even generate your own and then explain the excess, the deficiency, or the golden mean. And if you want to incorporate a scenario to explain it, maybe from personal experience, that's cool too. Maybe it's a lesson you've learned, or maybe you demonstrated an excessive emotion or a deficiency and somehow have come to grips in doing so. So, The sixth part will be in the Confucian lecture coming up here in a little bit. Now, all types of desire, emotion are malleable, and they can therefore become, right, virtuous. We're taught to respond to objects. We gain beliefs over time. We appraise our outcomes, and this is all part of our socialization process. Emotion and cognition thus become intertwined in this regard, and thus arises a tremendous social influence, and it's the psychosocial basis for emotional responding. So I'm going to make a case quite often that emotions are for doing, but also emotions are a result of our interaction with others. So family has a role in teaching emotional response that eventually becomes habits, and we can often talk about the struggles or the carryovers from our family when we look backward. Why am I the way I am? And we immediately can look to our parents and see what influence they might have had, right? We consider the culture, community, social standing, influence, emotional experience. For example, if one has no reputation to lose, then the experience of shame is unlikely. So having something to lose often then causes us to moderate our behavior in that regard so that we don't experience the loss. Janis Joplin had that famous line from me and Bobby McGee, and that is, freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. It's not an uplifting quote by any means, but one can certainly see where Joplin was coming from in writing that line. Now, and then finally, or the anger may arise to an insult deemed inappropriate, while those appropriately admonished must bite back their anger to risk having their anger deemed inappropriate. And note that this is going to lead us into some interesting issues in future lectures. That what is the relationship of emotion to power? And some people are allowed to exhibit anger, demonstrate anger, others are not. And how does that occur? So let's wind this down for now. We come to the end, and next up is going to be about Confucian and Homework 1's sixth part. So as you guys are making your choice, you'll need to look at both of these.